She slipped me a key across the counter, her eyes steady on mine, and whispered just 3 words that changed everything. Room 309. The taxi dropped me in front of the hotel, just as the late afternoon sunlight softened into gold, spilling across the polished marble of the entrance. I stepped out, my bag heavy on my shoulder, and for a moment I paused to take it all in. The quiet hum of the city, the subtle scent of rain lingering on the pavement, and the faint warmth radiating from the hotel's large glass doors. There was something about this place that felt deliberate, as if it existed just outside the rhythm of the ordinary world. Inside, the lobby was spacious and understated, warm tones of cream and walnut giving it a calm, almost inviting gravity. The sunlight filtered through the glass ceiling, catching on the edges of the polished floors and casting long, gentle reflections across the room. A faint perfume lingered in the air, soft jasmine, maybe, but mingled with something uniquely human, subtly grounded, like the quiet elegance of the staff moving in the background. I felt a pull toward the front desk even before I saw her. The receptionist was in her early 40s, though she carried her age with an effortless grace that made it impossible to ignore. Her dark hair was pulled back, neat but soft, a few strands brushing her collarbone as she moved. She wore a fitted blazer over a cream blouse, the kind of ensemble that seemed designed for subtle authority, yet her eyes hinted at something warmer beneath the surface, an unreadable mixture of calm confidence and quiet vulnerability. She smiled as I approached, and something in the curve of her lips, the gentle tilt of her head, made the hotel feel suddenly smaller, more intimate. "Welcome," she said, voice low but smooth, almost deliberate in the way it lingered in the space between us. She glanced at my ID, then, without another word, slid a key across the counter toward me. Her fingers brushed mine briefly, just a whisper of contact, yet enough to leave a strange warmth trailing along my skin. "Room 309, she added, her eyes locking onto mine for a heartbeat longer than felt necessary. There was an almost imperceptible pause as she looked away, pretending to organize papers, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something unspoken had passed between us in that moment. Curiosity prickled at my senses, a quiet excitement that mingled with the tired weight of travel. Who was she, really? Why this hotel? And why had she singled me out in such an ordinary-seeming act? I took the key, turning it in my fingers. Cold metal against my palm, smooth edges, but somehow heavier than it should have been, laden with expectation I couldn't yet name. The lobby, which had felt warm and calm a moment ago, now hummed with possibility. I sensed a story waiting for me just beyond the door of room 309, and a flutter of anticipation twisted in my chest. As I moved toward the elevators, I caught one last glimpse of her. She was adjusting her scarf, casual yet deliberate, and the corner of her lips quirked into a faint, knowing smile. I swallowed, trying to calm the sudden tightness in my throat, but it was no use. Something had shifted, something had begun, and I was already chasing it. I rode the elevator up in silence, the soft hum of the machinery filling the small space, a low vibration that seemed to match the fluttering in my chest. Room 309. The number repeated itself in my mind, like a whisper I couldn't ignore. I fumbled with the key, feeling its smooth weight in my hand, and for a moment, I paused just outside the door, taking in the quiet corridor. The walls were painted a warm beige, accented with subtle gold trim. A faint carpeted muffling softened each footstep, and the gentle hum of the city below seemed distant, almost unreal. Sliding the key into the lock, I felt that small, deliberate click of entry, a mundane sound made significant by the anticipation rolling through me. The door swung open, and I stepped inside, immediately struck by the room's elegance. It was spacious but not ostentatious, designed to be lived in rather than admired. The late afternoon light streamed through the large balcony doors, brushing the walls with a soft, golden hue. The curtains fluttered gently, stirred by a light breeze, carrying with it the faint scent of fresh linen and something floral, delicate, almost familiar, though I couldn't place it. A note rested on the polished wooden table near the center of the room. I picked it up, fingers brushing the cool surface, and read the single, simple instruction: "Wait for me." The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and the words carried a weight I hadn't expected. A chill ran through me, not of fear, but of anticipation, of something quietly extraordinary about to unfold. My mind raced with questions. Who was I waiting for? How could she know I would be here? And yet, beneath the questions, a strange thrill pulsed, a magnetic pull toward the unknown. I wandered closer to the balcony, letting my hands glide along the smooth railing. The city sprawled beneath me, glimmering with lights beginning to wink on as day surrendered to evening. The scent of night-blooming flowers drifted up from the hotel garden below, mingling with the distant hum of traffic, soft and steady. I leaned against the railing, imagining her here, how her presence might shift the space, the quiet intimacy she could bring even before she arrived. The thought made my pulse quicken, a low, steady thrum that echoed in my chest. Every small detail of the room seemed to call attention to her potential presence. The soft cushions on the sofa, the careful placement of books on the shelf, the faint warmth lingering in the air as if it had been waiting for someone to step inside. I ran a hand along the edge of the table, tracing the outline of the note again, feeling the weight of the moment. It was a space suspended between ordinary and extraordinary, and I knew with a certainty that was almost frightening that she had orchestrated it all, with intent, with purpose, with a quiet knowledge that I would be receptive. And as I stood there, looking out at the city, the room seemed to breathe around me, filled with a sense of quiet expectation. I could feel her before she arrived, in the lingering scent, the careful placement of objects, the light brushing my skin through the curtains. Room 309 was no longer just a hotel room. It was a threshold, a beginning, a space where something inevitable was waiting to unfold, and I couldn't help but lean further into the unknown, heart slightly unsteady but entirely willing. The knock on the door was soft, deliberate, almost hesitant. My pulse jumped in my chest, and I realized I'd been holding my breath without noticing. I set the note on the table and walked over, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. As I opened the door, she was there. Her presence immediately filled the room, not in a loud, overpowering way, but quietly, insistently, as if the space had been waiting for her all along. She was casually elegant, the kind of effortless style that only comes with years of self-assurance. A soft cashmere sweater hugged her frame, and tailored trousers fell perfectly, the faintest crease running down each leg. Her hair was down this time, the waves brushing her shoulders, catching the fading sunlight that filtered through the balcony. She smiled at me, not broadly, but in a way that felt intimate, like a secret shared in plain sight. My chest tightened. "Hi," she said simply, her voice soft but steady. It was familiar yet new, like a melody I hadn't realized I remembered. She stepped inside, letting the door close gently behind her. The air seemed to thrum with subtle tension, the kind that exists when two people sense that a bridge is forming between them, delicate but undeniable. The faint scent of her perfume drifted toward me, a warm mix of jasmine and something slightly musky, grounding and strangely intimate. She moved toward the balcony, her fingers lightly grazing the edge of the railing. I noticed the way the sunlight caught the curve of her cheek, the small way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Every detail seemed magnified, more deliberate. My hands itched to reach out, but I paused, aware that the moment itself carried a weight that no gesture could yet contain. We sat on the armchair, angled subtly toward each other. Her presence was close, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the faint brush of her sleeve against mine. It wasn't forced, just a gentle acknowledgement of proximity, a silent invitation to exist in the same space. She gestured toward the city below, but I found myself unable to focus entirely on the view. Instead, I was acutely aware of her, the tilt of her head, the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she breathed, the quiet confidence in the way she held herself. Conversation began naturally, almost casually, but beneath the words, there was an unspoken tension. Every glance, every pause carried meaning. When she laughed softly at something I said, the sound was warm, enveloping. I felt my shoulders loosen in a way I hadn't in days. When she leaned slightly forward to point something out on the balcony, her hand brushed mine lightly. It was accidental, but it wasn't unwelcome. My skin tingled, and I became painfully aware of the quiet pull between us, a silent acknowledgement that neither of us could fully articulate yet. Time seemed to bend around us, stretching moments into minutes and minutes into something that felt like hours. There was no need for grand gestures or declarations. The room, the soft light, the sound of distant traffic, and the warmth of her presence created a space that was intimate without being invasive. I realized then that this was the first real connection, the first moment where curiosity and desire intertwined with genuine comfort. Room 309 had shifted from mystery to a place where something quietly inevitable was beginning to unfold. The room had shifted, subtle but undeniable, since she arrived. The soft lamplight cast warm pools on the walls, the city outside fading into a tapestry of amber and silver as night settled in. I felt the quiet gravity of her presence more acutely now, not just as someone beautiful, poised, and intriguing, but as a person whose inner life seemed just within reach. If only I could lean close enough to listen. She perched on the edge of the sofa, knees bent and angled slightly toward me, fingers lightly brushing a throw pillow as she spoke. Her voice was softer now, lower, measured in a way that suggested trust, but also hesitation. She began to speak of her life, not in sweeping declarations, but in quiet, almost hesitant fragments. She spoke of small regrets that clung to her heart, of lonely evenings spent wondering if she was living the life she truly wanted, of fleeting moments of joy that she cherished but never shared. I listened, letting the words settle, each one painting a picture of someone real, layered, and achingly human. There was a rhythm to her confessions, a cadence that drew me in, and I felt the weight of the space between us ease slightly with each word she offered. I realized that trust was being extended, fragile, delicate, and yet profound, and I felt an urge to meet it with equal sincerity. I shared a little of myself, cautiously at first, admitting to my own vulnerabilities, the restless uncertainty of my life, the sense of searching for meaning in small, fleeting experiences, the desire for connection that I'd rarely allowed myself to acknowledge. As I spoke, I noticed how she listened, leaning in ever so slightly, her eyes steady on mine. There was no judgment in them, only presence, a quiet acknowledgement that my words mattered. The room seemed to contract around us, no longer just a hotel space, but a cocoon of quiet intimacy. The air carried the faint scent of her perfume mingled with the night breeze drifting in from the balcony, subtle but grounding, marking her presence in the room as tangibly as the soft carpet beneath our feet. I became aware of the warmth radiating from her just a breath away, the small movements of her body, how her hand brushed against her own leg as she shifted, how her shoulders relaxed when a story resonated. At one point, our hands met, lightly, as she reached for a glass of water. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, yet it sent a ripple through me, a spark of acknowledgement, a silent affirmation that we were inhabiting the same emotional space. We laughed softly at an awkward tangent in conversation, our shared sound echoing in the quiet room, a gentle punctuation to the growing connection. By the time the city outside had blurred into the dark velvet of night, I felt a shift within myself. I was not merely curious about her anymore. I cared. I wanted to understand her, to meet her hesitations with patience, to honor the vulnerabilities she was offering. The age gap, the circumstances, the uncertainty, all of it seemed secondary to the simple fact that here, in this moment, in room 309, two people had begun to truly see each other. And as she spoke, her voice a soft murmur against the backdrop of distant traffic and humming lights, I realized that something was unfolding, quiet, deliberate, and entirely inevitable. The evening had settled fully over the city, turning the world outside the balcony into a mosaic of scattered lights and quiet shadows. Inside room 309, the lamplight softened everything, painting her in hues of gold and amber, highlighting the subtle curve of her jaw, the delicate lines around her eyes that told stories she hadn't yet shared. The room itself seemed to shrink, every surface, every object now intensely present, the polished table, the soft carpet under my feet, the faint hum of air conditioning, and yet none of it mattered as much as her. We had drifted into a comfortable silence, a rare pause in which words felt unnecessary. I noticed the tilt of her head as she looked at me, the way her fingers lingered on the edge of the armrest, the subtle shift in her posture that seemed to bridge the distance between us without breaking any invisible rule. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, a quiet gravity that pulled at me, and the sudden awareness of how close she was made my pulse race. Her eyes met mine, lingering in a way that spoke of restrained desire, curiosity, and hesitation all at once. There was a softness there, but also a quiet strength, as if she was measuring not just me, but the moment itself. I became acutely aware of every detail. The faint scent of her perfume mingling with the night air drifting in from the balcony, the subtle rustle of her sweater as she shifted, the way the light caught the small highlights in her hair. It was overwhelming and grounding at the same time, each detail a reminder that she was real, tangible, and yet somehow just beyond my reach. I moved slightly, leaning back in my chair, my own breath catching as the tension between us thickened. She mirrored the movement, leaning just enough toward me that I could feel the air between us grow warmer, more intimate, but not crossing the line we both seemed to be observing. It was a delicate balance, a dance of proximity and restraint, and I found myself holding my breath in anticipation of what might come next. Every glance, every small gesture carried meaning. When she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers barely grazed my cheek as I instinctively leaned closer. My skin tingled at the touch, though fleeting, and I felt the quiet pull of unspoken desire threading through the room. My hands itched to reach for hers, to close the gap, but I held back, knowing that the restraint itself made the moment electric. Her voice finally broke the silence, soft and low, tinged with something unspoken. Even her words, casual on the surface, seemed charged with layered meaning, each syllable a subtle invitation to linger in the tension rather than resolve it. And I realized then that desire wasn't just in the words or the touches, but in the quiet moments between them, the pauses, the glances, the way proximity alone could make my heart race. Room 309 was no longer simply a hotel room. It was a space suspended between hesitation and longing, where every breath and movement carried weight. I felt acutely aware of the age gap, of the social norms and expectations that hovered just outside the door, but they didn't diminish the intensity. If anything, they heightened it. And as the night deepened, the tension coiled between us like a living thing, patient, deliberate, and entirely undeniable. The city outside had quieted further, the distant hum of traffic now just a soft, rhythmic undercurrent. The lights from the buildings across the street shimmered faintly against the dark glass of the balcony doors, casting a gentle glow across the room. It felt as if the world had narrowed to just the two of us, the space between us charged with a fragile anticipation I could feel in my bones. She moved slightly closer on the sofa, a subtle shift that brought her hand just within reach. I noticed every detail, how the light brushed the curve of her cheek, the soft fall of her hair across her shoulder, the warmth radiating from her, as if the room itself had absorbed her presence. There was a quiet courage in the way she looked at me, an openness that made my chest tighten and my thoughts scatter. "I don't usually do this," she said finally, her voice low, almost hesitant. "I don't usually let myself feel something this strongly, so quickly, but I can't pretend it isn't here." Her eyes met mine, steady and unflinching, revealing vulnerability beneath the surface of her calm. It wasn't a confession of weakness. It was a careful, deliberate act of honesty. I swallowed, feeling my throat dry in a way that was both terrifying and thrilling. I feel the same," I admitted, voice rougher than I intended. The words were simple, but they carried all the weight I couldn't express otherwise, the restlessness, the longing, the quiet awe I felt in her presence. Saying it aloud made it real, grounding the tension that had hovered between us for hours. She gave a small, almost shy smile, and I noticed a faint glimmer of relief in her eyes. For the first time, the subtle tension in the room shifted into something warmer, something softer. Her hand moved slightly closer to mine, fingers brushing mine lightly. The contact was deliberate yet tentative, an acknowledgement of the bridge we had been building silently. I felt her warmth seep through my skin, her heartbeat almost echoing in the hollow of my palm. We sat there in quiet for a moment, letting the unspoken words hang in the air. The city outside was a blur of distant lights, but inside room 309, everything felt immediate, intimate, and entirely ours. I became acutely aware of how small gestures carried immense weight. The way her shoulder leaned slightly toward mine, the subtle rise and fall of her chest with each breath, the soft curve of her lips as she spoke my name softly. The conversation continued, quieter now, filled with pauses that carried meaning. She shared thoughts she'd never voiced aloud, and I responded in kind, revealing fears and hopes I usually kept buried. Every word, every laugh, every subtle glance wove a web of connection that was at once fragile and unshakable. When she finally rested her head against my shoulder, it was like the room itself exhaled, a long, steady release of tension. My arm moved instinctively to wrap around her, a gentle, protective gesture, and I felt the steady warmth of her body against mine. There was no rush, no urgency, just the quiet certainty that we had found something real. Room 309 had become more than a room. It was a threshold, a space where honesty, vulnerability, and desire met. And in that soft lamplight, with her resting against me, I understood. This was the moment everything we had felt up to now crystallized into something quietly, profoundly true. The city outside was quiet now, the streets below glowing with scattered lights, distant traffic reduced to a soft hum that barely reached the balcony doors. Inside room 309, the lamplight lingered, warm and intimate, painting the space with shades of gold and amber. It felt as though the room itself had absorbed the events of the evening. The quiet confessions, the tension, the shared glances, the small touches that had carried more meaning than words ever could. She sat beside me on the sofa, angled toward me just slightly, her hand resting lightly on my thigh. The touch was unspoken yet deliberate, an affirmation of everything that had passed between us. I felt the warmth of her fingers against my skin, a subtle pulse that mirrored the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I didn't move away. I couldn't. The quiet intimacy of the moment demanded presence, demanded awareness, and I let myself lean into it. The soft rustle of her sweater as she shifted, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the night air drifting in from the balcony, even the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. All of it combined to create a profound sense of connection. It was the kind of closeness that didn't need labels or declarations, the kind of intimacy that spoke of understanding, trust, and the promise of something deeper. I glanced at her, noticing the faint curve of her lips in a soft, contented smile. Her eyes met mine, steady and calm, yet sparkling with unspoken emotion. There was a quiet recognition there, an acknowledgement of the journey we had both taken to arrive at this space, this moment. And I realized, with a calm certainty, that I wanted to continue this journey, with patience, with respect, with deliberate care. We leaned into each other naturally, not out of urgency, but out of comfort. Her head rested against my shoulder, and I instinctively wrapped my arm around her, drawing her closer without pressure, simply offering steadiness. I could feel the subtle warmth of her body, the gentle weight of her presence, the steady thrum of her heartbeat against mine. There was no need to rush, no need to force anything that didn't already exist. The room was full of quiet, tangible intimacy, each second stretching into a kind of sacred space between us. The balcony doors framed the cityscape beyond, a glittering backdrop to the quiet closeness we shared. I let my thumb brush gently against the back of her hand, a slow, deliberate motion that seemed to communicate more than words ever could. She responded with a soft squeeze, just enough to signal understanding, and I felt a deep, almost overwhelming sense of warmth and satisfaction. For the first time that evening, I exhaled fully, allowing the tension, the anticipation, and the nervous energy to settle into something calm, something fulfilling. Room 309 had become more than a hotel room. It was a space where trust had been extended, desire acknowledged, and emotional intimacy fully realized. We sat there in quiet together, letting the world fade, knowing that this was not an ending but the beginning of something quietly profound. And in that shared silence, with her resting against me and the city lights shimmering beyond, I understood. We had found each other, not through grand gestures or sudden revelations, but through the subtle, deliberate moments that had built something real, lasting, and undeniably human.